Everyone tells you that humans are social creatures, that we need connection to survive, that isolation is dangerous. But here's what they don't tell you. Some people aren't running from connection. They're running toward something else. Something most people never experience, and neuroscience is finally starting to understand why your brain might be wired completely differently than everyone around you. If you prefer being alone, you've probably heard it all. You're antisocial, you're depressed, you need to get out more. But here's the problem with that logic. It assumes everyone's brain responds to social interaction the same way. It doesn't. In 2011, researchers at Harvard discovered something fascinating. They measured dopamine responses in people during social interactions, and what they found split the room. Some brains flooded with dopamine during conversation and group activities, but others, their dopamine barely moved. It wasn't that these people were broken. Their reward systems were just calibrated differently. Think of it like this. Some people have a dopamine slot machine that pays out constantly in social settings. Every laugh, every conversation, every group dinner rings the bell. But your machine? It's selective. It doesn't reward you for small talk at a party. It rewards you for deep thought, for solitary creation, for the silence where your mind can actually expand. This isn't loneliness. It's specificity, and the world has spent decades confusing the two. Now, you might be wondering, if humans evolved in tribes, why would some of us be wired to pull away from the group? The answer is more strategic than you think. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies noticed something unusual. In every tribe, there were always a few individuals who spent more time at the edges. They weren't outcasts. They were observers, scouts, the ones who noticed patterns others missed because they were distracted by constant social noise. A study from the University of British Columbia in 2016 found that people who prefer solitude show higher activity in brain regions associated with imagination, memory, and future planning. Specifically, the medial prefrontal cortex. This is the part of your brain that constructs scenarios, solves complex problems, and builds internal worlds. In other words, while everyone else was maintaining the group, you were mapping the territory. Your ancestors weren't the ones making sure everyone got along. They were the ones thinking 3 steps ahead. And that trait didn't disappear. It's still in you, coded into the way your brain processes the world. But modern society doesn't value that anymore. It values constant presence, constant availability, and if you don't perform that, people assume something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. You're just operating on a different frequency. Let's talk about what actually happens in your brain when you're around people too long. Most people don't realize this, but social interaction is neurologically expensive. Every conversation requires you to read facial expressions, interpret tone, suppress certain thoughts, perform a version of yourself that fits the context. Your brain is doing all of this simultaneously, burning through glucose and flooding your system with cortisol if it goes on too long. A 2003 study from the University of Helsinki used fMRI scans to track brain activity during extended social exposure. They found that introverted participants showed significantly higher activation in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, after just 2 hours of group interaction. Their brains were literally treating socialization like a low-level threat, not because they hated people, but because the cognitive load was exhausting. Now compare that to solitude. When you're alone, your brain shifts. The default mode network lights up. This is the system responsible for self-referential thought, introspection, and creativity. It's where ideas connect, where your sense of identity solidifies, where you actually become yourself instead of performing a role. You're not avoiding life when you're alone. You're processing it, integrating it, making sense of everything the world throws at you. And that process can't happen in a crowded room. Here's where it gets interesting. People who spend a lot of time alone tend to have something most people struggle with their entire lives: a stable sense of self. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi studied this for decades. He found that people who regularly engage in solitary activities, reading, writing, creating, thinking, develop what he called a differentiated self. They know who they are independent of external validation. They don't need a crowd to confirm their worth because they've built an internal reference point. Most people define themselves through others, through their relationships, their roles, their social identities. But when you spend time alone, you strip all that away, and what's left is the raw material of who you actually are. That's not isolation. That's clarity. There's also a neurochemical component here. Oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, spikes during social connection. It feels good, but it also creates dependency. Your brain starts to need that external hit to feel okay. People who are comfortable alone have learned to generate their own baseline of contentment. They don't need someone else to regulate their nervous system. They've become self-sufficient on a neurological level, and that kind of independence? Most people never achieve it. Society loves to pathologize what it doesn't understand. If you like being alone, they'll say you're lonely. If you don't crave constant connection, they'll say you're depressed. But loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted isolation. Solitude is the peace of chosen separation. A landmark study from 2018 published in the journal Personality and Individual Differences made this exact distinction. Researchers found that people who actively chose solitude reported higher levels of autonomy, personal growth, and life satisfaction than those who were socially engaged but felt emotionally disconnected. In other words, you can be surrounded by people and feel completely alone, or you can be by yourself and feel completely whole. The difference is agency. You're not broken because you don't need what everyone else needs. You just figured out that your energy is finite and you'd rather spend it on things that actually matter to you. Deep work, creative projects, thoughts that go somewhere instead of evaporating in small talk. The world will call that selfish. But it's not selfish to protect your mental space, it's self-respect. So if you've ever felt like something was wrong with you because you prefer your own company, let me tell you what's actually happening. Your brain is wired for depth, not breadth, for meaning, not noise. You're not avoiding connection. You're just selective about where you invest your finite energy, and that selectivity isn't a flaw. It's a feature. The people who changed the world, who wrote the books, who made the discoveries, who created the art that outlasted them, most of them spent a lot of time alone, not because they hated people, but because they understood something fundamental. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with your own mind, and that relationship requires space, silence, time away from the static. You're not lonely. You're not broken. You're not missing out. You're just awake to something most people are too distracted to notice, and that's not a weakness. That's a kind of quiet power. If this resonated with you, there's something else your brain might be doing that most people don't understand. Something about the way you process emotion that explains more than you think. But that's a different story.